Okay, I think we have participants joining in both from Ethiopia and the US. I'd like to say good evening for those of you in Ethiopia. It is 9 p.m. and we thank you for joining us here tonight, and also good afternoon for those of you in New York and New Jersey and wherever in the US, especially in the East Coast. We are very glad to invite and host all of you in the first talk of a series of intersectional conversations we hope to have on the case of constitutional dialogue to guide, inform, and strengthen social movements in the communities that they happen. My name is Suraphel Mathewos, Alemu, and I'll be introducing this collaborative project that we officially kick off tonight called Article 41. This project is funded by the US Department of State's Citizen Diplomacy Action Fund to raise awareness and engage young professionals in Ethiopia around the 41st article of the Ethiopian Constitution that states the social, economic, and cultural rights of Ethiopians through a series of documentary filmmaking, workshops, and social media engagement. This project aims to highlight the role of civil society in informing and organizing citizens in the exercise of their rights and also impact their community positively. And all our participants on this session have been specifically invited from a very diverse set of practice in the creative, health, and entrepreneurship sector in Ethiopia. I am glad to say that we have among us individuals who are recognized for the impact they have made and continue to make through the ventures they are undertaking. And tonight I have Dr. Ronald Quincy and Mastewal Tereffe with me, along with Katina Bonner, in extending the first invitation for all of you to join in a conversation on civic engagement and its imperatives in our communities, both in the US and Ethiopia at present. So I'll start by introducing Dr. Ronald Quincy, who is a professor of professional practice at Rutgers University and former academic director at Rutgers Civic Leadership Institute. Dr. Quincy has extensive experience and expertise in social movement and civic engagement, both in the US, where he served as Chief Operating Officer for the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, and in Africa, where he worked with the late Nelson Mandela during the post-apartheid transition in South Africa. I met Dr. Quincy during my Mandela Washington Fellowship at Rutgers University and have since been immensely proud to call my mentor. And next we have Mastewal Tereffe, who is a distinguished lawyer and activist based in New York. She is a researcher and advocate on rule of law and good governance. And from 2018 till 2019, I'm happy to call you Mastewal. Mastewal provided legal research and drafting support to the newly established Law and Justice Affairs Advisory Council at the Federal Attorney General's office in Addis Ababa. Prior to that, she completed several policy and legal internships with organizations, including the International Development Law Organization and the World Bank Group. Mastish has a JD from New York University School of Law, a master's degree in public policy from Oxford University, and a bachelor's in political science, social research, and public policy from New York University, Abu Dhabi. And finally, we have Katina Bonner, currently a graduate student at Rutgers, earning her master's in social work with a concentration in management and policy. She also works with Dr. Quincy to implement various development projects, both in the US and Africa. She will be taking our questions from participants as our speakers are speaking and attending to hand raises that are encouraged from anyone who wants to contribute their thoughts. We also encourage anyone who is not speaking to mute their microphones so that we have better auditory experiences. And again, I'd just like to say I am incredibly honored to invite all of you to participate in what we hope will be an insightful and engaging session where we share our experience, put forward our ideas at a time of imminent change in the status quo of governance, social organization, and the idea of citizenship in the global context. So I'll first like to invite Dr. Quincy to start us off with an introduction to social movement and constitutional dialogue from his global experience. Dr. Quincy, you have the mic.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all of the participants for this extremely important and exciting, hopefully, conversation about constitutional government, social change, and how we come about to our present time globally on the issues of governance and shared and common purposes. So I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon. So I'd like to start you with a brief story. A republic, if you can keep it. And this relates to the American Constitution and how it evolved into this democratic form of government that was challenged mightily just January 6th of this year. An amazing and unprecedented assault on our constitutional government and our democratic processes took place following the election and the upcoming inauguration of our current president, President Biden. But first, this Constitution, this American Constitution, is only 4,543 words. 4,543 words is our original Constitution. Not a long document, not a document of perfect wording and phraseologies, a document that was flawed even grammatically. But it has given us the foundation to govern ourselves since the founding of this great document. So I teased you with this title, A Republic, If You Can Keep It, because in 1787, at our Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and Suraphel has been to Philadelphia, and Mathewos, she's also have been to Philadelphia, where our Constitution was debated for several months. And on that final day, as the Constitutional Convention ended in 1787 in Philadelphia, most Americans don't even know this story, and those who know the story don't know the woman involved. Because this Constitution was derived at in secrecy by all men and all white men, and mainly men of great wealth or of high position in society, she asked, Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia asked one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, this question, quote, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" And end of quote. And what Franklin said was, a republic, if we can keep it. And so, my friends, this is our challenge globally. Those of us who have republics, like your great country and mine, how do we keep it? And whose responsibility is it? It is not our founding fathers' responsibilities, as in the case of America. It's the responsibility of our citizens to bring forth social change movements that will change constitutional frameworks that have left certain people out. Our Constitution, as I said, started with only 4,543 words, but it now has 7,762 words because it had to be amended in order to include those people and those protections that it originally excluded. Not a single one of the indigenous people, our Native Americans, not a single one of them were included in the original Constitution. Not a single one of the Africans who had been extracted from the great continent and brought to the New World as slaves, not a single one of them were included. Not a single woman was included. No mothers, no sisters, no daughters, no aunts, no grandmothers, no great-grandmothers were included in our original Constitution. So the fact that your great country has changed and modified constitutions over the past several decades is of no surprise, because constitutions are merely a reflection of the people with whom they are supposed to protect. And that's why social change movements are important. Social change movements are important, and they were important for the inclusion of women, or we may still not have women included in our Constitution. Social change movements were important for African Americans, or we would not have been included in the laws that derived from the Constitution. And of course, but for social change movements, our Native indigenous populations would not be included, and still fully a third of them have dual citizenships as their indigenous tribal members here in America and as American citizens. We have still not, in over 200 years, reconciled the rights of those peoples who were the originators of our great population. And so, as we transition to my colleagues, I lay the framework that we have republics if we can keep them. Suraphel, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so the very beginning of this Article 41 project was started as a challenge to the citizenry of individuals who are engaged in starting new projects, new jobs, and new ideas in our community. And it was crucial that we laid the groundwork for a constitutional backing to what we did, and were surprised by the dearth of awareness that not only was it okay to actively participate in the provision of public access to public services, not only was it okay, but it was also constitutional that people would challenge the status quo to better impact their communities and create a more efficient ways of doing things. So I'd just like to circle back to Mathewos to discuss a little about the current context in civic participation from your experience in the US and also in Ethiopia, where you consulted with our current government.
Okay, thank you, Suraphel, for inviting me, and for everyone for joining the conversation. I will speak more about the Ethiopian context, and maybe I will leave a lot of things for discussion because it's a really interesting group of people that are joining. So I will really defer to the conversation part. But what I would say, I think, on from my perspective is I've spent a year last 2 years ago in Ethiopia. So I'm gonna try and see and tell you my observation of the youth movement or the youth space, my assessment of it when I was there, in the context of the political change that we're going through in Ethiopia. And I'm going to focus on the professional class, youth in professional circles, right? So I'm going to start first by making like a controversial statement, maybe, about what type of civic engagement the professional youth in Ethiopia, and Addis particularly, are engaged in now. It is, I would say, if for the sake of this discussion, we agree to divide civic engagement into two broad categories, sort of the non-political voice on the one hand, and then the social change and political voice on the other hand. If we divide it that way, by political, again, I refer to issues where citizens are individually or collectively try to bring about systemic change, putting pressure on the government, state actors, institutions, or even private actors like businesses and business leaders, and pushing them to act in a certain way, or exposing them when they act outside of legally mandated authority. So that I call the political engagement. And then on the other hand is, first, let me give you an example. Or for example, the first type of political participation is, say, Article 41, this initiative that you started, where it focuses on a few rights in the Constitution, wants to highlight that entitlement and right that the Constitution enshrines, or it could be a think tank, or it could be a women's feminist organizations that focus on women's rights and engage that way. Or it could be an individual effort. For example, we all have that person in our family or in our friend circle that can't not speak up about injustices, right? For example, a policeman beating a man on the streets of Addis, or it could be a wayala or a helper in a taxi who mistreats or exploits a passenger, and somebody speaks up and says, this is wrong, this is, I also consider that as sort of a political engagement or a civic engagement that is political in some way, because you're challenging authority in a way that's rooted in rights and obligations, right? So I think that political type of civic engagement in Ethiopia is almost non-existent in the professional circle. And you're going to push me back on this, but that's the one criticism that I have. Whereas on the other side, we have active civic engagement on non-political issues. So this category could be volunteering in nonprofit organizations, non-electoral organizations, non-political organizations. It could be community problem solving, like Suraphel was. You see that in our communities, like people get together and work on infrastructure and other things. It could be membership in professional groups or fundraising for charities, creating jobs. Those things are being done among the professional circle, but not so much political. And so I'm going to push, ask all of us to really prioritize that the second type of social change and political participation is probably the most essential. And if youth, professional youth in Ethiopia are kind of pushed into a category of civic engagement that focuses only on the apolitical, we're not going to be able to solve the problem sustainably, and also won't bring about the social transformation that Dr. Quincy referred to. Each generation will have to make that transformation, and we're going to be shying away from making that if we don't engage that second category of civic engagement. So that's why I think technology is another tool that we could be using for professionals in different circles to challenge each other to be part of the second type of civic engagement. And that type of engagement will involve government and state institutions. It will always take different forms depending on what each of us are interested in and what our risk tolerance looks like. But that's my main challenge, and I'm going to be talking about examples and ways that I have tried to do that on Twitter and other ways that other people are doing it since the past 3 years since the change. But I'll keep that for later when we start going into Q&A.
Thank you, Mathewos. So speaking from our experience as founders of a health promotion company, Now, it had been almost 2 years since we had this idea of a service which was basically the provision of a space where health promotion could be done through a community-driven, context-based solution. And this meant, we thought then, local organization of people to solve specific problems in their environment, but at scale. And that was the ideal. But the reality of its implementation was a messy process where most assumptions about the infrastructure upon which our society organized itself were proven mostly insufficient to support a service like that. So we were mostly engaged in creating the demand along with promoting our service that risked the danger of giving up our ideas. So, but then the demand came in the form of a global pandemic that required people to actively and individually participate in the protection of their own health. And one of the most efficient ways for individuals to get what they want, whether it was health or provision of essential goods and items, was to work together to secure their needs from their immediate environment. So all of a sudden, a context-based, community-driven solution for health did not sound hopeless, right? And it actually became the best work we ever did in the shape of a project that provided protection of not only health, but livelihoods of employees and small businesses through a mechanism where we would secure the supply chain of face masks by locally producing them and using these products as a tool for employment and health education. But the main goal of this project didn't end there. It also showed us the not just the probability, but a real possibility of an intersectional approach to common challenges that we face. But the question was, is facing a common challenge through an intersectional approach a political move? See, unfortunately, all too often people need desperate situations to open their eyes and hearts to new possibilities. But this time, we wanted to carry that momentum to translate our experiences towards a re-envisioning of health and public service in general as a space where a proactive citizen engagement results in changes that meet the demand of the day and not a reactive and coercive need that makes it happen. And there are a lot of experiences and stories within this group of this session where individuals chose to band together and effect change. We recently heard a story where a doctor, I think Ruth is among us, where she just started an NGO by herself with a group of friends to provide health as a basic right and not as a service that the government would dole out to people. And this is what all young professionals who are trying to make a change face as a challenge. And in my experience of speaking with and listening to my compatriots in fields where they are starting the service they give as entrepreneurs or advocates, it isn't that their ideas are insufficient or lacking, but the fact that they are essentially in service of the future, where they hope to bring about and see as a possibility. Now, this puts them, I should say us, in the space of dissonance between a situation that is and a situation that we think should be. And however, without a system that is outside of our own heads, that recognizes the struggle and advocates for the success or appropriate failure, where these individuals do not have to die if their ideas die, is crucially important. But unfortunately, most young creators and professionals who start something new face alienation and incredible frustration in communicating with their environment and are prone to stay in their own bubble and not grow or bear their suffering in silence and isolation. It was at this time that we came across Article 41 of the Ethiopian Constitution, where it states the obligation of the state to essentially support these individuals to be employed in their chosen field and allocate ever increasing resources to the provision of public service, including health and education. So we found that it basically binds the state to its people on a platform that advocates for these individuals and young professionals who are going out there and trying new things. I was also curiously amazed by how few people, especially in my own sphere, were aware that this was constitutional of our state to be able to demand and work for access to public services and challenge the status quo to create a positive impact. So what we do as citizens to better our community in terms of a lack of service for or access or health in any sector. We have people from diverse sectors here. It is a political decision to take back agency and to organize. And without the understanding of the undergirding structures of our country, which are the social contracts that we live by, it is entirely unimaginable to conduct yourself in a confident and community-based way to create a sustainable solution. So this is our own idea and reason behind raising awareness by engaging young professionals within these sectors to speak about Article 41. And I'd just like to invite Dr. Quincy to speak more about how do these communities go about creating social movements, and what do they use as tools of communication and bonding optimism in their own communities.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start by saying that you don't divorce the individuals from the community and the communities from the individuals. One of the reasons why someone mentioned earlier this on the call, status quo. One of the reasons why the status quo is what it is because the powers, the powers that set up the status quo are the powers that are still deciding on when and whether to change the status quo. So social change comes into the perspective that we have to look at self-efficacy first, and we have to look at community efficacy and our role in the community efficacy, and find our common purpose. And so, as an example, the transformation from an apartheid government in South Africa to a democratic republic was not all certain. And I want to make sure that we understand that it was not all certain that once given the right to vote, that you would have an electorate that was prepared to vote, that had never been allowed to vote before, the Black majority. And one of the efforts that I was involved with Mandela and Lenawe Bambusa and Puffle Malifi, who was in charge by the ANC of sort of creating the grassroots campaign to get people informed. And the first thing that we talked about was communications. How do you create the knowledge, the self-efficacy for individuals who have never been enfranchised before to take that franchisement now, that right to vote, and to understand the mechanics of it, to understand how to discern the various candidates for office and how to mechanically exercise your right to vote, and to do so with your own free will and not based on what someone is telling you to do. I would frequently come across people who would say, well, the ANC will tell me what to do. And to secure a republic, the people have to tell the leaders what to do. And so what we set up was a system of providing workshops and training, informal workshops and trainings. And the initial phase of this was over 500,000 people disenfranchised Black South Africans who participated in these workshops. And their responsibility was to take that information, that knowledge, and go home to their towns and their villages, and to share that information, both written information as well as verbally and orally. Because many people were not literate. And one of the other challenges was, okay, and we had this problem in America, where people go into the polls thinking that they're voting for one presidential candidate, and they made a mistake and voted for someone else. Tens of thousands of people made that decision in Gore versus Bush in Florida that changed the election entirely to the favor of George Bush, because they thought they were voting for one candidate and actually voted for another. And so in South Africa, what they ended up with, as you guys know, is they put the photographs of each of the presidential candidates on the ballot itself. And even though Mandela's photo had been banned for decades in South Africa, every single Black South African recognized that photo. He was not the only African on the ballot. Chief Buthelezi was on the ballot. There were over 24 people who were on that ballot. So the first thing was put his photo on the ballot. The second thing was to make the balloting system so simple that even the most uninformed and illiterate person could be coached, if you will, in order to create that self-efficacy that I can make this decision about voting for Mandela or voting for Buthelezi or voting for de Klerk. So it was a grassroots, ground level communication strategy using word of mouth in those communities that were not accessible to mass media, and using more formal structures for those who lived in the urban areas and who did have access to radio, television, and other resources, and building it from the ground up, and making sure that grassroots system was sustainable, because that was not going to be, of course, the only election. And there, of course, have been numerous elections since then, not just national level, but regionally, provincially, and locally. So my, in summary, building a grassroots base that understands that we all communicate at different levels of comprehension, and that we understand that not all messengers are the best people to give the message. And so making sure that that we have in the pipeline various means of reaching people, and various means of evaluating and assessing how effective that messaging is. The same thing that is going on in Brazil as we speak. Brazil, as you know, has the largest population of people from the African diaspora anywhere in the world except for Nigeria. So almost 100 million people from the diaspora are Brazilians. For the first time in their history, that population shift has occurred. And these are people who are struggling to determine how to get from being disenfranchised in a country that they are the majority population to being more fully enfranchised with a constitution that leaves them out. And one of the ways that they're doing it is mass rallies, where teach-ins are occurring, where people are helping to transfer information and knowledge to individuals who ordinarily would not have access to it. They don't have smartphones, they don't have access to cable news, they don't have access to college education or even advanced childhood education. And so being able to access them with information at their level of comprehension is always important, and to do it over a sustained period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Quincy. I think this perfectly segs into Mastew's now prominent role in raising awareness using social media as the common ground where we all participate in.
So I wouldn't say I have had any, honestly, prominent presence on social media, but maybe Suraphel is referring to, some engagement I had with government handles on Twitter. So that's my only presence on social media, to be honest. And so there are many people, activists, as you know, who use social media for political change in Ethiopia. Some less constructively, you may say. But I know what Suraphel is trying to get at is what can we do as people who are professionals in Ethiopia, for example, who are not very well versed in the very messy politics of our country, unfortunately, but want to still not to cede control completely to over our country's politics and discourse on constitution to other people necessarily, right? So that's my perspective, where it's coming from. And maybe just to go back to what I said earlier. So, and I really want to like stop talking and really hear what other people on this group are going to say about this, because my assessment in Ethiopia, what's going on with the Addis Ababa professionals in Addis and other big cities, is there's a sense of resignation. You know, our country's politics is not inviting to youth who have professional opportunities. And that's because obviously we had one party dominance for a long time, low levels of media freedom and political freedom. We also know that, you know, our society is comfortable with this notion of the state and the government as a top-down guardian. The government officials are, you know, these paternalistic elite that provide us with resources and things that they take from us, but we see it as like a provision of sort of benefits that we should be grateful for. So our relationship with government and state institutions is very, is wrong, is my assessment. And that's just our culture. You know, Mengist is the baby god, right? Like we don't disrespect Mengist. So that's the main thing I think that we have to work on as a society, first as a professional class. And then the notion that we can avoid politics also has to change. You know, this notion that as professionals, you hear people, politics is not for me. You know, our country is such that our, you know, parents teach us politics is fire, like stay away from it. So we're sensitized to think of this as something we have to avoid. So we can't really see ourselves as active actors in that. So these two things have to change. We can't avoid politics. If we ignore it, it's still going to continue to change the circumstances in which we operate, whether we have jobs, whether we have the freedom to create startups, whether we have institutions that enable our professional aspirations. So all of these things, right? So it starts from, I think, these two key points. And then we have to, I think, inculcate within ourselves this idea of like a healthy disrespect to authority. This is something that one of my mentors used to say, is that, you know, we have to disrespect authority in a way that's healthy and grounded in rules and in expectations that are transparent. And some of them come from the Constitution, what the Constitution and laws give us. But we have to have that disrespect to authority of all forms, but in this context, the government. And so with this in mind, especially with people in startup cultures, and the new trend in Ethiopia and Africa generally is the idea that, you know, we need to just work on creating jobs and startups. So the trend is that, you know, the focus of the youth should be solely on like job creation and entrepreneurship and volunteerism. And it's understandable why this is trending, because our governments are not creating the types of opportunities that populations, our big population requires. But that's misguided for the reason that I explained earlier. And this is what, you know, Ori, you probably know her, Kenyan activist, often says, is that Africa cannot entrepreneur itself out of its basic problems, like a lack of electricity, lack of roads, and all of these things. You can't entrepreneur out of these basic systemic change and problems. And so we need to get our governments to work, and we need to use our professional abilities in some form to push government from different angles, to change the government, and also to make sure to how it operates, but also to make sure that rights and entitlements enshrined in our constitution are being respected. So I'll give you 3 examples of the whole, social media engagement that Suraphel noticed maybe as potential means. First is demanding government agencies online to be to pushing those handles, government handles. So it could be Twitter or Facebook. You have the government agency handles that are constantly putting out information that is mainly propaganda, right? Governments have to do PR and they do that, but we don't challenge them enough. And as people with access to social media and ability to ask critical questions, we have to use those tools to direct engagement with government officials and individuals who talk about mostly self-promotional stuff on government handles. So I try to do that a lot with the agencies on Twitter and others, where especially with the changes that are going on Ethiopia, with laws that are being reformed and whatnot, asking them for the documents that we need to know as people to interrogate, asking them for why they're respecting, where they're not following some legislative procedures and all of that. These are simple things, but you would notice that a lot of people are not expecting it. So they have to go back to their agencies and get their house in order. So this could be, if you're interested in health, it could be the Ministry of Health, or if you're interested in businesses, could be the investment, it could be the Jobs Creation Commission, others, but really push government employees and government officials to deliver the entitlements that Article 41 outlines, which are really great rights and entitlements. The second is access to information. This is something I'm really passionate about because it is a cross-cutting issue. If you're an artist, there is all these, government agencies that get taxpayers' money or donors' money on our behalf for art, or it could be for health, or it could be other socioeconomic rights. We have a constitutional right to information about how our money is being used, how it's handled, obviously by government, but also how it's distributed. If you look at Article 41, it talks about equity. It talks about, every Ethiopian has a right to get government help in getting jobs or getting the type of profession that he or she desires. These are strong rights. So what is happening on that? Can we ask our Warada people what our budget is for arts in a given calendar? We have all these rights in the Constitution, we just don't use them. So the internet is another means of asking for those rights. And I've tried to do that with one project in Ethiopia, with the Mastewal Square project that was very controversial, as you know, but I started doing that, and other people did that for other things. I know from Addis, like professionals who are interested in, a lawyer requested information about the new investment regulation, and the government agency was like, we didn't even know, they didn't even know they were required to do these things. But these are things that people can do just in individual capacities, don't even have to do an organized effort. But the third thing, I think, is starting up NGOs and technology companies and other creative companies that address this disconnect between the public and government. So it could be, like I said, it could really depend on what your interests are. But for people who are interested in transparency, for example, which I'm really interested in, just making sure there is a platform where people can report corruption, for example. There are a lot of people interested in coding and creatives in Addis, really focusing on solving problems, targeting government performance, but using your interests and passions, technology, some other creative skills, and then bringing attention to government in a way that's less charged by the other discourse that's dominating, which is important, but the identity-based discourse that's completely dominating airwaves. So this is like the 3 different things I'm thinking about. And the great thing about it is that it can create opportunities for collaboration among different professionals. I've collaborated with, I don't know if you know Sarah Bushra, but she does a lot of creative stuff in visual arts. She's many things, but she's an artist that does a lot of visual work. And so for education, for a few years, she was our designer and our and our creative person for this project, we're working on education policy, pushing the Ethiopian government to really sit down with students and stakeholders in education to address education quality problems. And this is another, opportunity to push government on policy, but also to create a social movement around education quality. And same thing could be said about, what's going on in the health sector and other sectors. So I really think that there is first, once we believe that we can't avoid politics in Ethiopia, we have to really think about how do we bring our skills and use technology to minimize the risk of political backlash and become more active citizens as opposed to just subjects of the Ethiopian Republic.
Thank you, Mathewos. This brings to me an idea that of a common story that most new starters experience. For the leather entrepreneur who is asking for microfinancing with his local government, to the local young doctor who is asking for a place to build a clinic. I'm just looking at the names and telling you the stories. There is this experience where these individuals get to encounter the edges of the political government as they are engaged in trying to build their new ventures or their new startups. So there is a rise in this political consciousness that comes out of their conflict with the closest, the imminent government body. So I'd like to direct this conversation to Dr. Quincy in how one individual recognizing that it is usually the same bottlenecks and edges that politically they're engaged by, how they then choose to go about communicating that and also pushing back.
Thank you for that question. So I'd like to incorporate that into the question about consciousness, and a Brazilian, she created this concept called consciousnization, which is a different level of consciousness raising, which of course is necessary in order to engage in a meaningful pushback of social change with government. Because, as was mentioned earlier by our colleague, corruption. The framework for corruption is who does it benefit? And if you push for reforms, what you oftentimes get is a deregulation of corruption, which makes it elite, which makes it legal. It takes something that is illegal now and it gets deregulated to a point where it becomes legal, and the corruption that we know it as corruption continues on forward. So that's why we have to look deeper into these fundamental changes and looking at ways in which the structures and the philosophical underpinnings of the structures themselves are both changed. And the people who manipulate those structures are changed as well. So you get a new set of people managing the structures, and you get a new set of founding principles that set forth what it is that we're trying to achieve more philosophically. And so I think that there is, if you think about liberation theory and what it really is, it's stepping away from the old established rules that have enriched and have empowered a small caption of the population, and it's grinding everyone else. So a radical, more intergroup sense of dialogue about consciousness raising is really, I think, is what we're talking about, is hammering out through intergroup dialogue and community across all levels of the populations, and essentially creating a liberation theory, that my mind is focused on this social change. I'm learning it, I'm teaching it, and I'm living it. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for that, Dr. Quincy. Before I continue, I wanted to open up the floor to see if anyone had any questions they would like to type in the chat box or to kind of raise their hand. Just let me know so we could facilitate a discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd also like to invite our participants to share their own experiences in starting up and maintaining their ventures and their experiences with the local government as it relates to their Article 41 rights.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear Dr. Samuel, yes.
Hi, how have you been? It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I'm honored to be here, part of this conversation. I hope it's gonna bring us lots and lots of objective discussions and thought processes, and it ignites something within all of us to actually try and act on what is expected. So I'm trying to, right here, I'm going to bring a different perspective. As some of you might know, including Dr. Suraphel, I was working on the other side of this conversation. Basically, I was working, I'm still on technically, working in the government office at different capacities in the health sector. Some of them by choice, some of them not really by choice. Different people might define it differently, but I was a politician at some point in my life, expected to be upholding some of the rules that you're mentioning, the Article 41 and the other things as it pertains, especially in the health sector. So what I want to say is there are certain social constructs of reality that we have accepted. So we have to be borderline, older, much older than we are currently to be a politician. You have to be engaged in the politics and all in the dirty games and whatnot. You have to be elected officially and whatever. There are different things that are said in the circles of our peers. And I've faced a lot of resistance from the family, from a lot of people when I was actually trying to engage with the government at different capacities. But I had to push through, and I actually feel like I did make some differences. I'm not going to be bold about it and say, made it great. No, but it was there. There are moments where you can change policy. Those policy changing and policy making moments, there are moments when you can affect individual lives of different peoples. And those moments are not given to you. You have to take them. You have to struggle your way into the powers that be. You cannot always keep on fighting from the outside. Of course, that is important, and which is the most, I think that will have a great deal of leverage in that regard, but whether it be in entrepreneurship, human rights movements, or any movement whatsoever. But still, I think something that's lacking from some parts of my generation, our generation, is the will and the drive to actually do it from the inside. To actually go there and try to make a difference, to be there for the policy changes, to make what we truly uphold, truly believe, what we want to receive from our government, to actually be a part of that change and to try and engage at our level best to create a difference. So that is something I wanted to offer. It's not a solution, of course, but it's an experience. So is it given to everyone? No. Is it always a good result? No. But it is something that we need to do now more than ever, and moving forward even. It's not easy. It's very complicated, but the youth needs to be engaged in this regard. We need to be productive. Innovation is not always about creating something new, an app or anything. Innovating, redesigning a work process at the organization you're working in, be it in a government, in a public setting, or in a private setting. That is innovation for me at a micro level, which will add up to become something much bigger and make a huge difference. So that is something I wanted to part. So looking forward to the continued engagement. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. That was a great perspective coming from you. And I'd just like to bridge your ideas straight to Dr. Quincy so that he might reflect on them.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Samuel. And this is what you said is terrific, because we have to, social change is not all on the periphery of looking inside, but being on the inside looking out as well, right? And getting our charge from those who we respect from the outside and trying to make change for those of us who are on the inside. 30 years ago, maybe longer, I worked for 2 different governors. I worked for a Republican governor, and my Democratic friends couldn't figure out how that was possible. And then I worked for a Democratic governor, and my Republican friends couldn't figure out how that was possible. I had friends who didn't know whether I was a Democrat or Republican, but we were able to get, in that particular state, we were able to get changes written into laws that created more opportunities for people of color and for women who had not had those opportunities before. Those laws are still on the book 30 years later, right? And that was something that we were able to do from inside of government. Barack Obama was a community organizer before he became president, and he used skills that he learned on the outside of government to help him on the inside of government, right? He used those community organizer skills. And of course, those skills include the character, which means trust, right? It means being ethical. His most important constituent when he was a community organizer in Chicago were old women. He was able to build enormous trust and a sense of belonging with those women. And you know what? When he ran for the state legislature in Illinois, that same group of voting group were his #1 constituents. When he ran for the United States Senate, that same group were his #1 constituents. Old women who he was able to communicate with and build trust, starting with listening and not talking. Listening and not talking, right, doctor? So what he was able to do when he ran for president was to go back to his community organizing basics, which was communications, building trust, not over-promising, creating a sense of belonging. And when he became president, the reason why he was reelected is because that same constituent base still believed in him. If you look at all of the elections that he ever won, and he won every single one that he ran on, if you look at all of Obama's elections, you will see that the voter turnout for him, which groups and which subgroups in the American population voted for him most often, and it was older women and older African-American women at that. My mom voted for him by absentee ballot before she passed away. And her voicemail message to me was, I voted for that boy because I trust him. And that's what we have to create. And we have to do it from the inside and the outside of the government structures, to create trust in ourselves, which is part of that self-efficacy, and creating trust of the organizations that we run. Like many of you are running NGOs, or you're working for NGOs, or you're running businesses, or you're working for business establishments, or you're educators, and making sure that the efficacy of your organization meets the high standards of the general public. And when you've done that, you've built trust, and you can grow that organization. You can transcend an organization that is not political into an organization that can help political change, right? And I think that's what Obama was able to do. Learning from those old ladies and taking that same grassroots approach all the way into the White House, and winning 2 terms. And still to this day, as we all know, one of the most popular public figures around the globe, because we trust him. Thank you for the question.
Mathewos, does those ideas ring any bell as a person that have worked on both sides either?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Samuel, I think, made a really great point. And I didn't really think of working from within government as the next frontier for us, because I feel like we aren't even doing, as again, really focusing on the professional class and the cities. We aren't even doing the pushing a little bit on the basic governance problems. So I was just focusing on, let's start doing that. But definitely, I mean, and I really respect Dr. Samuel for doing that. I mean, going into Ethiopian government with an open mind about change is something that, you know, I mean, obviously a lot of young people do it because that's the, you know, you get into these institutions either because that's how you get, I think, Medev, you know, sometimes that happens it becomes a natural professional engagement. But for many people who are critical about what to do and explore opportunities, they shy away from it. So I honor him for, you know, doing that and for sharing this experience. And in my 1 year at the Attorney General's office, I was there as a, you know, a short-term, you know, fellow. So I knew that I could take risks that many people who are, you know, thinking of building a professional future within a government structure may not, because I wasn't really dependent, I wasn't paid by the government. But these things are very practical, right? The question of backlash, the question of also promotion and other interests that we have other than social change as individuals. So I really respect what Dr. Samuel said, and I think more conversation on these things would be good. I mean, the young people I worked with were also interested in, you know, that's what people thought with the change we had 3 years ago, was that young people were being appointed to things, and professionals were being appointed to positions. So we thought that was going to make a big difference in how the reform was going to pan out. I'm curious to see what people thought about that, you know, because young people and women going into the cabinet, how much of a difference has that made if we don't go in it with the consciousness of trying to change structures that have been working for the country. So yeah, I would leave it that, but I know many people are like have ideas. So I want to hear what other people are thinking.
I'd just like to draw on a memory from 2 years ago. I don't know if Dr. Samuel remembers this, but as a government employee and civil servant, he was the first professional advice that I received when I started out my venture. He was the deputy head of the Addis Ababa's Health Bureau. And I first brought my idea of Doctors in Action to him for which he had a pretty critical and constructive feedback. And this reminds me how crucial it is to identify these individuals who are helpers and mentors within the structure of government. And it's very essential to sort out the wheat from the chaff, if you will, and know who to speak to within government. So that's something that I am thankful that I started out with. So yes, raised hands. I see Yordanos. I can just give the mic to you.
Thank you, Dr. Suraphel, and thank you, Dr. Samuel. You've already mentioned some of the points that I really wanted to mention. Just to maybe share my experience in advocacy in the world of civil society, we've tried using some of the points that you've already mentioned, like Mastewal mentioned, the fact that in the cities, the professional youths are not yet interested or even excited to be working with government or to voice the concerns of those that are their in advocacy in the constituencies. And for the most part, that's very true. I will not be, I know you're expecting me to say something against that, but it's very true in regards to any engagement in politics, which is why the professional group is pretty much afraid and still have that fear in most people, which is why when, even when we're talking about advocacy, there's still to voice the concerns of those. And for the most part, that's very true. Not be, I know you're expecting me to, I think that attests to the fact that when there are much concerns with regard, we're still politicians in one way or another, engagement in politics. Well, with us, advocacy was illegal for civil societies that get a lot of their funding from the rest of the world, when that's more than 98% of ignites within our peers. One of the things that we faced was even public meetings where government would call out young people to attend. We'd go and then we'd be banned by federal police officers to not enter them for more than 6 hours. And I say this because that has happened to me several times, where I don't know, we've been forced out by, again, police officers from meetings that were supposed to be the world. But eventually, you know, with people like Dr. Ephraim that were planned by federal police officers, that has happened to me several times. And I say this where, I don't know, we've been forced, like, but eventually, you know, with people or have reached out to young people that were outside of the government, where we've been pulled in for these sessions that we wanted to attend, to now be able to say, you know what, from now on, we're not going to come attend your meetings. You can come to our meetings that we're going to organize, which is how in last August, we had the first Ethiopian Youth Health Forum that was supposedly organized by the Ministry of Health, but it was entirely led, organized, and I don't know, the whole session was led by young people, and some of you were there, and I was very happy to see that. But this was because of that appointment in these positions that the change comes from within, but a lack comes from the fact that they do not have the support that they need. That's the first one. The second one was the fact that it goes back to the point on information, where young people do not know that they can be a part of this change. So that's why we had to organize a year of policy literacy forums, where young people were allowed to know some of the policies, some of the strategies, some of the legal restrictions and laws that need to be changed to make sure that our rights are respected, or some of the ones that are existing that we just didn't know about, like Article 41. So it's a multi-pronged system that needs to work, because there's no one way to be able to bring about that change that we do most certainly need. And I hope that some of this experience can be helpful, but most of the things have already been mentioned here. It's just a matter of strategizing them into one multi-pronged system that can actually get us to where we want to get. Thank you, Dr. Suraphel.
Yeah, Jordan, that was
where we
such a
want to
great
get. Thank you, Dr. Suraphel.
that was such a great overview of your work and your perceptions. This reminds me of one of our success stories within our participants, also another Dr. Ruth Matuku. Dr. Ruth started her own NGO right after graduation and was able to secure a very big plot of land to build their own clinic, to provide people their basic health services. But that process, because everyone here knows how difficult and costly it is to secure a plot of land to do anything. But within a year and a half of after graduation, Ruth and her group of friends created this NGO and were able to deal with their local governments to create this opportunity for them. And I'd just like to, if Ruth, if you're there, I'd just like to invite you to share that experience and how that success materialized in terms of your strategy.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. It's good to meet you all. I'll be sharing a little bit about our experience when it comes to having to deal with local government. I come from a small NGO. It's a non-government, nonprofit. So having to deal with the initial point of having to create this nonprofit non-government was to bypass the government, but it became really impossible for us because we just hate the system, like the health system, basically for both for patients and healthcare professionals. We thought it was bizarre. So we thought to ourselves, okay, let's bypass that system, which was actually very difficult. So we had to work with the government. We had to reassign and reassess our ideas. So having to deal with local government here in Addis and where we got the land in Wallo, completely different experiences actually. The local government in Wallo, actually, they actually wanted to work with us because they were very tired of the higher maternal mortality rates and the perinatal mortality rates. They were very fed up, and the people there wanted us to build a center there. And we were actually pushed by a lady called Hayat Mohammed. She was a resident in that area, but then she went to Germany due to several economic reasons, and now she wants to give back to the society. So because of that, we started this this movement, or whatever you call it. So the local government initially wanted to resist, but the people wanted that MCH center. We're building an MCH center, like for mothers and children, of course. They wanted that so much, so they started pushing the local government to give us the land. So in the end, they could not say no because they were scared something might happen to those officials, because that's an area where everybody's got guns. And even when they came out to greet us, they were carrying guns. And I thought, oh my God, what has happened? And everybody was like, no, this is how they show respect. And everybody's got guns. Guns are nothing there. So, they actually express themselves in very violent ways in some ways. But the officials there, they were very scared that something might happen to them. So they had to give us the opportunity to work with them. That's what happened. So basically, they gave us around 5,000 squares of land to build them an MCH center. It was a very, and even like during the, we were trying to make them promise things that they would do to us. So we had a collaboration later, and on our agreements, they agreed to give us a sand. It's very expensive actually. So they had to promise to do that because of the people. The people kept pushing the local government to actually make the changes for them. It's very challenging to work with local government here in Addis. We try to work with children and women affairs, and especially so to introduce our organization. What we do is basically we give a free medical care for children in general. Actually, we want to give free medical care for all children in Addis. So we started with orphanages, like Kababat orphanage is one of the most popular, the only government orphanage in Addis, and we had so much resistance from the bureau, more than you know, to actually execute any of our ideas. Honestly, they didn't like it when we were there because they thought we would add up the load of work, which is ridiculous. Patients were dying, like infants were dying right and left, and they think workload is their biggest problem. And I can't even begin to understand the I don't even know, like I don't even know what to say to that. And one time we actually organized a medical campaign because measles, pneumonia, sepsis was right and left. So those are like infections that could be cured, like with several antibiotics. Actually, it wouldn't even be that costly to actually evaluate a patient. And we brought over like 20 doctors at a time, and then we were trying to help them out. And it's funny, the resistance came from the management, and they said we had to give them 3-4 letters to allow us to go to the compound, a compound which we've been helping for 1.5 years, by the way. And we did not understand the resistance. And we went and asked, and they said it's simply because it's unnecessary. And they even made COVID an excuse. It's funny how kids are dying from malnutrition, pneumonia, sepsis, and things like that than COVID. And their major concern was all those doctors, they're going to spare COVID to the kids. And I'm like, what kids? Do you know that do you know what kills kids? It's not COVID. It's the other comorbidities. So maybe we should treat that before we talk about COVID. And we had some heated argument with the Women and Children Affairs there in Addis. And it's funny how local government acts in Addis. It's as if I cannot say it's out of not knowing, or I don't know. I sometimes it feels like it's out of spite, because I don't know, like if you can save a single child through just a very simple effort, and somebody's on the way of you doing that. I mean, how can you explain that? If not spite, I don't know how to explain that. In so many ways, we've been discouraged with the government, honestly, and we still want to bypass the government. We don't think the system fits us perfectly. What's the first thing that we think of when we're out of medical school? USMLE or any other country, Kenya, Djibouti, anywhere, literally out of Addis right away. That's what everybody thinks. Why is that? It's because of the resistance from the government that pushes every educated doctor to get out of the country. But we refuse for that to happen for the next generation. We want to create a system where the government won't be a problem for a medical service, for somebody to receive a medical service, and for doctors to provide medical service. Because the last time we checked, when we called out for volunteers, like in 4 days to treat more than 300 street kids, there was a venue prepared by Give Ethiopia, and we did that. More than 50 doctors volunteered. What does this tell you? It means that people are ready to give service, but there is no venue, there is no platform for doctors to actually give medical service. And people actually came to get treated. What does that tell you? They're fed up with the system. They just don't want to go to clinics or hospitals. They don't want to stay in line for millions of hours to get one checkup. So we want to narrow that. We want to narrow that gap. I don't know how much I have answered your question, but this is our experience, and we would like to work with all of you guys. And I'm so honored to have spoken here. Thank you.
Ruth, you are definitely one of the civil organizations that we aim to feature on our platforms, definitely. But you've also spoken to the contrast between local government in Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia, and the local government in Wallo, in the rural parts of Ethiopia. And I see there is a disparity between the direct participation of people in government in Wallo versus Addis Ababa. I think Addis Ababa is, civil servants are much distanced from the people they serve. And Wallo, civil servants are they're neighbors practically with the people they serve, and there is that imminent need for change. A couple of hands are raised, so I'll shut up now and go to Dr. Samuel.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to raise a few points, and maybe some of them might be advices. As I see some of us participating in this will continue to be engaged with the government, whether we like it or not, because of course, that's how it should be done. Of course, it's challenging. So something I wanted to start with is as having worked with the government. So the first time you ask something, every time it's easier to say no. Working for government, there's a lot of bureaucracy, lots of people who might be not ill-meaning, but there's lots of incompetency in the public sector. Even competency might be there in different regards, different people in different positions. It's very complex. I'm not going to try and explain or even assume to understand the complexities there. So I would just recommend a couple of approaches. The first thing is most likely going to be no. Again, as I said, Addis Ababa, it's very complex again, but there are different, even working on the inside, different sectors don't see eye to eye on different things. So there are lots of vested interests from both sides, from the government side as well as from the NGOs or any private entities. So we need to acknowledge and be aware of that. So we need to try and be unique in our approach as an individual or as an organization that tries to work with the government, engage the government. That's something important. We need to be aware of the landscape, so to speak. We need to know what's going on. Furthermore, we should be able to try and create a stark contrast of what we're offering to showcase the value of what we have to offer regarding our project, our organization, how it stands out from different attempts that have been made before, how we have to be reassuring, we have to be bold about it. Still, we have to try and be diplomatic about it. Again, another thing that we need to be aware of is there are different sector organizations, there are different levels of government structures. So if it's not the city level, we have sub-city level, Warada level, and those kinds of things. So it's tiresome, I know it's tedious, but knocking at different doors, at different sectors, at different government levels is very much important. Something I've discussed with Suraphel and other colleagues before is that we usually tend to direct our movements in the wrong direction at times. For example, the job scarcity of jobs, as well as the surplus production of doctors, medical doctors currently, or health professionals in general in Ethiopia. Most of the tension or the movement or the social media outrage is directed towards the Ministry of Health. Maybe Mastish might have some insight into this as well, because different sectors have different constitutional standings and different constitutional contributions. Job creation is not really part of the health sector's forte. And we have a decentralized government, which is a federalistic government. Every region has their own roles and responsibilities. And I'm not saying they're not part of the problem. I'm not trying to be defensive. I'm just trying to offer some points to say that we need to aim our forces, our pressure at the right direction. It's not just about the amount of force. It's not about being together, which we usually are not, which we usually are shouting at different directions, barking up the wrong tree. But still, when there is need, where there is a need for change, and where there is a will to make that change come about, we need to actually be grounded on what really is the right pressure points, pressure areas to make the difference that can come by. So that is something we have to be aware, and that is something I frequently see lacking. Most people are emotional, most youth are driven and energetic, but still the approach that it's undertaken is not really par. And I think we ourselves parts of this discussion, and we have to influence people. We have to learn from each other to try and make a better difference. I'll try to stop there and forward the question to Dr. Quincy. There is a lot of talk globally about decolonizing global health. I'm currently studying my postgraduate studies in global health at University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda. We're very much engaged. It's all about equity and those kinds of things, those kinds of discussions. And there are some steps towards it, so to speak, but I don't think we're doing it fast enough globally. I don't think it's being done in the right way as well. Some of it is just a facade. Some of it just pretend. And it's difficult for me because, most of our health services and the health sector, especially in low and middle, especially low income countries, depends on so much aid money, so much money from foreign donors, and even other sectors as well. So that is some form of influence from the Western organizations, the powers that be, whatever it might be. That is a reality structurally violent towards the people who are impoverished, but still be that as may. How do you try and balance still needing the aid money, support to do things, to make things better, and having a direct and grounded and realistic discussion about decolonizing global health? How does that work? How do you think that would play out? And how do you see we go about it, if there are any recommendations? Thank you. That's it.
I appreciate that very much, Dr. Samuel, and it's a great span of questions, and here's my attempt to answer. First of all, in my perspective, global health is in want and needing of a global health system. We don't have a global health system in place that provides equal access to pharmaceuticals, to preventive medicine, and otherwise good public health. You have good public health, and you have good medicine to follow, right? You have the ability to provide the world with a coronavirus vaccine. How about doing that, right? How about being as concerned about the vaccine's distribution in the United States as we are concerned about it in the so-called global South, right? Because we are one globe, no matter how we want to consider ourselves as being separate, but unequal. We are one global health. And when the Ebola crisis hit, we were one global health. With COVID-19, we're one global health. We're one climate change because we're one climate. And so I think I'd like to start with, in terms of the whole notion of aid and assistance, I'd like to start with the notion of fairer trade agreements that will help to strengthen countries in Africa in particular. It would help to strengthen their own economies. There is too much outflow of natural resources coming from sub-Saharan Africa that are enriching other parts of the world, and my great country most especially included, but in the EU countries and increasingly in Asia as well, right? So when I see a continuation of the outflow of resources that are then taken and are manufactured or otherwise processed in other parts of the world, where the value of that natural resource is magnified for the economies of other parts of the world, but minimized for the economies of Africa, right? And so if I have fair trade agreements, whether they're bilateral or multilateral trade agreements, if I have fair trade agreements, I don't need as much aid. In fact, I'm on the opposite end. I flip that. I'm in a position as African nations of providing aid to other countries around the world, and maybe even parts of the United States. But I can't build a strong health system internally in African countries if I don't have the economic wherewithal to do so. And one of the biggest inhibitors of my economic wherewithal are these unfair trade agreements and the imposition of certain rules that accompany the money that we do send out to the global south, right? All the rules and the regulations that goes with those loans and with those grants. Very, very quick case in point. We do a lot of work in Haiti, a lot of work on the ground in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010, a lot of work. Building medical clinic, building school and orphanage, and put up pop-up medical clinics throughout the country. We do a lot of that work. But if Haiti was economically empowered, they could do that work themselves. They could do that public health work. They could do those medical clinics and build an infrastructure internally that could sustain itself. So instead of doing that for Haiti, what we've done is to undermine their farming economy by sending free rice, US government sponsored free rice that is grown in the United States. The United States taxpayers subsidize the American farmers, and we in turn, through the US government, send free rice to Haiti, which has killed the local farming community. Which makes Haiti, therefore, perpetually dependent on the outside instead of being able to do what they can do on the inside, which is grow their own products, create an export market, and sell their excess rice and other products to other parts of the world, including the United States. So it's not the lack of resources. It's how those resources are disproportionately enriching the so-called global north and disproportionately disadvantaging the so-called global south. And healthcare and public health are right in the middle of that dynamic. It's right in the middle of that dynamic. And if we fix one, we fix the other.
Thank you, sir. So I think the conversation around health is taking over, while Article 41 covers economic, cultural rights as well. So I'd like to invite people from the creative sector to speak up. Until then, Mastish has raised her hand, so I'll just direct.
That was for the question that was raised right before, but I guess I could go back to it. Okay, so I think it was Ruth and Jordanos who raised their, really interesting challenges that they had. And I'm so glad they're sharing those experiences, because in terms of what Dr. Samuel said at the end, I have a different view. So they presented us with this challenge, and Dr. Samuel gave us one way of looking at it, which I also used to, like, that was my approach with Ethiopian government officials when we were doing the education work. I see that, Sarah is on this too. Sarah was a part of the education policy work. And we always struggle with the Ministry of Education, thinking our project was, ancillary or adding more work. And our approach was really what Dr. Samuel was saying, really try to, present ourselves professionally and make them convinced that there's value added, right? And really going there 5 times if the 4 people before then say no, right? And that's still important. I think thinking of government as a collaborator that can choose whether to collaborate on nonprofit initiatives. But I think where I want us to focus on now, especially with the opening up of the political space, which is new, is to really see government as not just a collaborator, but an entity that you have to hold accountable when it fails to deliver on things that are provided, right? So if Article 41 is an example, for example, it says, it has an obligation to allocate some resources for X, or it says that, it has to facilitate equal access to publicly funded social services. These are obligations that the Constitution put together. We never really think of it as like an obligation that a citizen can enforce in Ethiopia, because let alone a citizen, a political party never really had the authority to be part of a fair election. And, so we never think of it that way. But I think our approach really as a citizenry should be going on the proactive side and saying there are, constitutional standards that are then enshrined in laws and then in policies and other things that we are here going to enforce. And it's easier to say it, I know, because of our context, but the paradigm shift is necessary. Thinking of government as something that, is not something we beg opportunities and benefits from, but only an entity that is there because the Constitution required it to give us those services. So what does this look like in real terms? Like I say, last maybe 6 months ago on Twitter, there was a campaign to get the investment regulation out for the public. There are all these laws that are being passed now. I can give you a very extended list of the proclamations and regulations that are changing, many of them affecting you individually, creatives, people who want to create startups, people who want to change policy and all of these things. But very few young people actually know that these legislations are changing. Very few of them are being invited to public consultations. But the Constitution says you have a right to know these things. The access to information is a constitutional right. So what does this look like? I personally and others asked these government agencies responsible to put these documents out because it's a constitutional requirement. And it took some weeks, but some of them ultimately, because they're being shamed, have put them out. And these people are also actually like us, right? Some of them, you're right, that like Dr. Sama was saying, some of them are not aware, and there is a competency issue, but many of them are also just lazy, I would say. Like every one of us are lazy in our jobs, right? And civil servants are not immune. So we have to demand that level of quality from government, as we do from some of the companies that we pay money to. So what I would challenge young people is to be more assertive about speaking about laws and constitutional mandates and responsibilities to the extent they know them. Now, there's a really big gap in knowledge. So the question for lawyers and the question for people who focus on empowerment of civil society is how do you create that knowledge, shift that sort of knowledge gap and empower people to actually know what their rights are and then demand them. So I'm thinking of technology tools there where young people can create these websites to focus on health, right? For example, all these medical doctors are unemployed, right? Like I'm seeing all these, protests, and I'm like, how's this possible, right? So what is the Oromia regional government's health budget per year? Okay, do we know how much of it is used for human resource development? How much of it was used for training? How much of it we don't, right? We just think, oh, okay, there are no jobs and it's not the government's responsibility. And then we also know, health professionals cannot leave the country. It's the policy, right? That's where we stop. But I guess one question is for someone who's unemployed in a city in Oromia, the first thing is to think about, okay, what is, the health sector, what does it look like? What is the government's responsibility when it comes to providing jobs in the sector? And then asking for that information. It's not easy, but thinking first in those lines, and then about collective action. Okay, how do I ask for information? It's in the Constitution, it's my right. If they don't provide me, what do I do? What is the risk of doing that? So those things I think are much more radical for our society, but they have worked in other countries. I mean, people who traveled within Africa also know that civil society in those countries, even in Kenya, which is a neighbor, right? Like those things it's a culture that develops. So we have to start it step by step. And with the investment example I told you, this lawyer in Addis made a formal request after the Twitter rant, and they had to at some point. They had to put it out, right? So it doesn't seem an easy thing to do for individuals, but what I think lawyers, especially if there are lawyers here, have to do now is connect the dots between what is already provided for. Our Constitution is very progressive when it comes to these things. It actually gives us much more right to these socioeconomic rights and entitlements than other constitutions. So just bridging that and being much more aggressive about pushing government on these things. But good luck.
Thank you for that. That was really engaging and interesting. But before we continue, I want to know if there's anyone else who had anything to say, any comments, any questions, any experiences they would like to share before we wrap things up. Please do so. Thank you.
In the meantime, I'd like to just invite Mastewal again to speak to how state and government are not the same.
Yeah. In terms of just the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the state, we can think of it as the state is basically the infrastructure that, you know, that we have, which is always going to be there. If there's like an institution, if there's a society at the national level, we can think of the state that the permanent structure that's there, that is a constitution of the people through some type of social contract that they have with who governs. And then it has various elements of power, like a monopoly over power, right, to enforce things. And those are prescribed by a constitution and the laws that spring from the constitution. The confusion that maybe Suraphel you're hinting at is we always think of the current administration, the current government, as synonymous with the state. So the state, like civil society, is a ever continuing structure or block, but the government changes and the regimes change through history, but the state will always be there. The role of the state will change, how activist it's going to be in the economy, how less of an interventionist it's going to be, that evolves, but it's always going to be changed. So it's going to be there. And so our relationship with the state is one that will evolve. The government might change, but the state is going to be always the arm of policy and sort of a monopoly over power, over, I should say, force, is going to be there, like the private sector, which is a separate element. So it's going to be there. In Ethiopia, we always conflate them, and we always think that going after the current administration or being politically involved in one government is kind of the same as the state, or shying away from government can allow you to like put the state aside. But the state is always going to be, there's supposed to be, a power holder at some point. So when Ruth was talking about overstepping government or trying to avoid it, it's never really going to work, right? Because it's always going to be there making policy, making us pay taxes and other things that we cannot, unless we live in an anarchist environment, we cannot avoid. And we can never really, even with the most privileged status of saying, I don't depend on government to make money, I am a businessman, you're still going to be affected by what the state does. So I don't know if you're asking me a more theoretical question, but I think to the extent it's relevant for our discussion, that's how I would make a distinction between like government, administration, and the state.
Great. Thank you, Matish. Okay, there is a comment. I think Sarah Bushra can speak something about the creative sector's endeavors and the individual's experiences in that sector.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah, we hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to say thank you, Dr. Suraphel, for gathering us here, a conversation around our Constitution, one of the most vital documents that we don't engage with enough. And this is, all the conversations so far had been really interesting. Matish, Dr. Quincy, it's really insightful. And I also want to say congratulations to Dr. Ruth. It's quite a feat that you have done. It's really amazing. And we wish you all the success moving forward. And all of the experiences that you talked about really resonates with the creative sector as well. Another point that resonated with me very much was what Mastish has mentioned at the beginning, the umbrella reactions of most Ethiopians to politics, one being resignation. And I think for the creative sector, I don't think there is a blanket reaction, but from what I have seen so far, that's how we are. We have resigned from politics, and it is always something that we skillfully evade. And it's also in the spaces that host us, anything that has any hint of politics is kind of not accommodated, or we're not even courageous or brave enough to ask to be accommodated. But I remember, so I am part of an artist collective called Contemporary Nights. And during the political protests after the death of musician Hachalu, and that coupled with the protests, it felt like that was like the sense in the city that people were more attuned to what had been happening, and what has been happening was really politically directed. So we organized this conversation called The Political is Personal, to kind of engage artists to address what had happened, because what had happened was an artist who had been politically active who is murdered. So this directly affected us. So we did have a conversation about it. I think Dr. Suraphel, you were also a part of this conversation. And again, I think we just focused on something that was more comfortable, which was the pandemic and the way the pandemic affected us, rather than how the politics affected us, only because even the Zoom platform then already had become public and nobody wanted to share their political opinion publicly. So that's, yeah, on one side. And on the other side, not as an excuse, but I think there is, for example, we call, like, the motto for Contemporary Nights is art and vitality. A lot of artists, from what I understand, or the artists that are around me, we are in the creative sector because to survive. And I couldn't say it's a choice, because we are least visible, least represented politically speaking. Like, we get no attention. So it's like, unless you want to do the thing that you want to do, you would not choose to become an artist. So there is that question of survival. And yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. But definitely, I want to say I really appreciate being part of this conversation, and I am here to learn and listen, and to kind of, yeah, be more active in general in the political sphere. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. As we wrap up, I'd just like to remind everyone that tomorrow is the day that we officially launch our social media platforms for Article 41. We're going to be stating and engaging other individuals further down the line in our communication channels about constitutional dialogue, and also the tenets of this article as stated in our constitutional document. So I'd just like to also invite Dr. Ron Quincy and Mastewal for their final remarks, and then we can wrap up.
Thank you very much. Just briefly, I would like to speak to one word: duty. For those of us who live in democratic republics, it is our duty to understand our constitutions, to understand that we are indeed in charge. One of the things that I'd like to thank the State Department and with this citizens diplomacy project is that, if nothing else, it helps to raise the consciousness level of those of you participating and those of you who will be sharing this participation with your friends and colleagues. That it's the duty to be informed. It's our duty to be civically virtuous in our pursuit through nonviolent conflict resolution means social change in our respective countries. We have seen it in my country work miraculously against the most powerful central government perhaps in the world. It is undergoing all kinds of social change because we take it as our duty to challenge our government because we are the people. And we are empowered by our Constitution, and we are encouraged by our Constitution to hold our elected officials responsible for these progresses that we seek. And your government should be held accountable as well. The elected representatives are merely there to promote what is in the best interest of the people. And if you translate the Greek ideology of democracy and the Latin perception of what a republic is, you need both. You need to empower the people, but you need to also make your elected officials accountable. So I thank you very much for having me as a part of this. I believe in statesmanship. I believe in self-sacrifice. I believe in sharing political dialogue across all spectrums. And I believe in challenging at the highest levels of authority when those authorities require being challenged. So thank you very much. And I'm enjoying my Ethiopian coffee as we're all in conversation about Project 41. Thank you very much.
I could go on, and just what Dr. Quincy just said is really, if there's one takeaway, I would try to, emphasize from conversations like this is changing the perception of government and maybe pushing like sectors of society where politics has been seen as like the other people's job, to change their view about government and see it as a duty to challenge. So really like a healthy disrespect to authority, like I was saying, I think we need to really try and inculcate that culture among professionals, because we have privileges as professionals that other parts of rural communities don't necessarily have, which is engagement with government and potential to change it. So that's what I would say. And there's not much time to talk about different things, but I'm really open to like Ruth or like other people who are interested in thinking of their engagement with government more critically and collaborating with lawyers, technology people and others to problem solve together. So people who are interested in contacting me, I'm really open from both a legal perspective, but also just brainstorming. And one last thing about what's happening in Ethiopia right now is, it's very depressing and very isolating. And like Sarah was just saying, it pushes you to a corner if you don't have the vocabulary to address what's going on. But it is a historic mistake for us who are in this circle to say we can't engage in this space. I think what we need to do is own the space and really push in and say, this dualism between what type of federation we want, whether the constitution should be torn down or a new one needed, that cannot be the only discussion that has to happen. The parallel conversations have to happen about what type of government we want and where we see our role in it. So really pushing ourselves into the conversation is our challenge, and becoming vocal about what type of Ethiopia we want. So that's the challenge I think I want to leave us with.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Before we finish, I'd like to point out to the symbolic power of Ethiopians on a Sunday night at 11 p.m. talking about an article, and from New York, Rwanda, and Addis Ababa, and the only person who's drinking coffee is an American.
I have coffee, Suraphel, but I wouldn't insist on ruining that. Sorry.
Thank you for disproving my thesis. But it is this that I call the state. It is individuals choosing to hold a conversation about their duties as citizens. And as we kick off this Article 41 project, I'd like to invite all individuals sharing in this call to disseminate the message, to speak about their rights, and to also be open to listen to their colleagues, their friends, and compatriots, whether in Addis Ababa, New York, Rwanda, or I think that's London with Maskaram. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. And you will hear from us on our social media platforms and on our outputs and documentaries and other productions. So yes, thank you. And you'll hear from us soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you very much, Suraphel. This was great. I learned an awful lot, and you have a team of extraordinary young and talented Ethiopians, and your country is in great hands.
Thank you, sir. I am actually quite proud of our friends who are able to be part of this.
Yes.
Although they stay up late, which was a personal sacrifice, which you advocate for. But
yes, great.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you, Katina.
Look forward to debriefing in the days to come. Thank you.
Yeah. You will get my updates on the drive.
Yeah.
And also, on our meetings. Thank you, Katina,
Okay.
for everything.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.